real people.
I call this meeting to order. Unfortunately, there was an interruption or there was a delay caused by the vote. The intention, if House of Commons resources permit, is to still do the full 2 hours. So that would be that would take us to I guess 11:47. We'll see what happens. Okay, so Commissioner.
Yeah.
Welcome.
I have other matters, Mr. Chair, but
Who's this?
sorry, I was saying I cannot stay till 1:47, but
Who
we'll
is
have to
speaking?
discuss that.
Who is speaking?
Kyle Seaback.
Okay, well, I understand that. We'll have to deal with it when we get close to the 1 o'clock time slot. As I say, we don't know what the House resources will permit. There's always a potential for substitution. We'll have the committees will have to decide if it wants to adjourn before 1:47. Anyway, we'll deal with that as we get closer to 1 o'clock. Commissioner, but I do understand your predicament, Mr. Seaback. I do. Mr. Commissioner, you have the floor for I think it's around 13 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for inviting us today to discuss my spring 2022 reports. I would like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. With me today are Milan Dugnac, Philippe Le Goff, Kimberly Leach, and David Normand, who are responsible for the reports. Les 5 rapports que j'ai présentés au Parlement plus tôt cette semaine.
The 5 reports I provided to Parliament earlier this week are on programs that relate to the federal government's efforts to address the climate crisis. Last fall, I provided Parliament with an overview of Canada's climate record and indicated that audits of specific programs, like the ones I am discussing today, would follow. As the programs are ongoing, my reports provide a type of midterm report card that should help improve outcomes because the climate change clock never stops ticking.
At an early stage, our intent is to provide Parliament with useful information that can be used before the clock runs out. We cannot afford a 4th decade of failure on climate action. First, let's turn to carbon pricing, which is led by Environment and Climate Change Canada. As is recognized by the Supreme Court of Canada and many international organizations, effective carbon pollution pricing drives changes in consumer and producer behavior that in turn reduce overall greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon pricing is therefore essential if Canada is to finally succeed in significantly reducing its greenhouse gas emissions. We found that the department had ensured that carbon pricing systems were in place in all provinces and territories. In 2021, the department worked to address weaknesses in its initial approach that had allowed some less effective provincial carbon pricing systems to be accepted. However, the department did not fully address some shortcomings that could hinder the overall effort to meet Canada's emission reduction targets. For example, we found that federal requirements for large emitters continue to undermine the polluter pays principle by approving weaker systems for large emitters in some parts of the country. In addition, Indigenous communities and some groups in society remain disproportionately affected by carbon pricing systems. Il faut continuer d'améliorer l'approche du Canada pour la tarification.
Canada's carbon pricing approach needs further improvement to support the achievement of Canada's national emission reduction targets, including transparent reporting, so that Canadians can better understand the effectiveness and impacts of carbon pricing systems. Canada is committed to moving away from fossil fuel dependence towards a low-carbon economy that reaches net zero emissions by 2050. It is also committed to what is called a just transition for the workers and communities affected by this economic shift. This is the subject of the second audit released today. The burning of coal to produce electricity has been a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Phasing out coal is an early part of the government's plan to transition to a low-carbon economy. the government identified Natural Resources Canada as the lead department to deliver just transition legislation in 2019. When it comes to supporting a just transition to a low-carbon economy, the government has been unprepared and slow off the mark. The department took little action until 2021, and it did not have an implementation plan to address this significant economic shift, which affects a variety of workers, communities, regions, and stakeholders.
Its focus to low-carbon alternatives, the government is not prepared to provide appropriate support to more than 50 communities and 170,000 workers in the fossil fuel sector. Without a proper just transition plan in place, there are risks that are comparable to what occurred with the collapse of the northern cod fishery in Atlantic Canada in the 1990s. In the absence of a coordinated federal approach to support a just transition to a low-carbon economy, federal organizations relied on existing mechanisms such as social assistance programs. These fell short of achieving a just transition for coal workers and the communities where they live. As the coal phase-out is the first of several transitions to a low-carbon economy facing Canadian workers, communities, and governments, there is an opportunity for the federal government to learn from this initial experience to improve future policies and programs. The future will involve changes at a much larger scale than the coal phase-out, so it is essential for Canada to make up for lost time and ramp up its approach to a just transition. Le troisième rapport porte sur l'hydrogène.
Hydrogen is the subject of the third report. As Canada's energy mix shifts away from fossil fuels, attention is turned to hydrogen as a possible cleaner substitute. The failure to appropriately project hydrogen's impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions could jeopardize Canada's ability to meet its emission reduction targets. Two departments, Environment and Climate Change Canada and Natural Resources Canada, both endorsed the idea of this clean energy source, but took different approaches to project the role hydrogen should play to reach emission reduction targets. Environment and Climate Change Canada estimates hydrogen could produce the equivalent of a 15 megaton reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, while Natural Resources Canada estimates up to 45 megatons of reductions by the same date.
Scenario, Natural Resources Canada assumed the adoption of aggressive and sometimes non-existent policies, along with an ambitious uptake of new technology. In our view, the assumptions in the federal hydrogen strategy are overly optimistic and compromise the credibility of the expected emission reductions. This is concerning because Canada's greenhouse gas emissions have increased significantly since the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was signed in 1992, making Canada the worst performer of all G7 nations since that time. As I noted in the fall, Canada has consistently failed to meet its climate targets despite numerous plans and commitments. Going forward, Canada needs realistic goals, credible plans, and most importantly, effective actions. If hydrogen is to be part of Canada's plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then Environment and Climate Change Canada and Natural Resources Canada will need to coordinate their approaches and more effectively model and communicate a pathway for hydrogen. Our fourth report is a snapshot of the Greening Government Strategy launched by the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat in 2017. Federal government operations are a significant contributor to Canada's total emissions of greenhouse gases. We found that the Secretariat had taken initial steps to support department's efforts to reduce the federal government's environmental footprint. However, 5 years into the strategy, efforts to reduce emissions are not as complete as they could be. This is important given Canada's publicly stated commitment to reach net zero emissions by 2050 and to be a national and global leader in transitioning to carbon-neutral government operations. At the time of our audit, 8 of 27 departments had created reduction plans covering 81% of departmental emissions. We looked at national defense, the largest emitter in government, and found that there was no clear information about how the department's efforts were contributing to the overall reduction target. The audit found that some important information on greening government was hard to find, unclear, or incomplete. There was also a lack of detail on costs and savings. In addition, the emissions of Crown corporations were not part of the strategy. Overall, this lack of information makes it difficult for decision makers, Parliament, and Canadians to track whether the government will meet its 2050 target and whether Canada is actually being the global leader in greening government that it has set out to be. Il reste du travail à faire pour que la stratégie pour
More work is needed to ensure that the greening government strategy delivers the desired results and that complete plans and methods are put in place to track and report on emission reductions. In our last audit, we looked at whether selected federal funding programs contributed to more resilient, less carbon-intensive, and inclusive infrastructure investments. We found that Infrastructure Canada had designed and implemented a way to assess whether funded projects could better withstand the effects of climate change, such as increasing floods and wildfires, and help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In the initial rollout of the department's Climate Lens assessment tool in 2018, those managing infrastructure projects were required to provide detailed estimates of their project's expected emission reductions. However, we found that these requirements were weakened when the Climate Lens tool was changed in 2021. This reduced the department's ability to track and report on the funding program's contributions to the government's climate-related objectives. The information deteriorated to the point that Infrastructure Canada was unable to accurately account for the expected climate mitigation and resilience benefits of the projects it funded. We also found that Infrastructure Canada did not integrate Canada's commitments to meeting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals into the design of its programs. The department did incorporate gender-based analysis plus in the design of its programs and collected related information from project proponents, but it did not consistently measure and report on outcomes. Without complete and reliable information on the expected benefits and outcomes of funded projects, the government will not be able to tell whether its investments contributed to less carbon-intensive and more resilient infrastructure or to its commitments to enhance diversity and inclusion.
Of my remarks, the climate change clock never stops ticking. We are moving ever closer to some critical deadlines that the government has set for itself. I trust the findings and recommendations that I have brought forward today will help the government improve its performance in these areas of critical importance. Because climate change is an intergenerational crisis with a rapidly closing window for action, it is essential for Canada to translate its commitments and plans into real action and results. Our future depends on it. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We are happy to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Merci, commissaire.
Thank you, Commissioner DeMarco. Before we begin the first round, I would like to welcome MP Wilson, who is with us this morning, and also for committee members, the Minister of Environment will be appearing on May 5th, but his schedule has changed, so he will be coming on May 3rd instead. So it will be Tuesday instead of Thursday. So could you please note that? And now we can continue with Mr. Seaback for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and Mr. DeMarco, thank you very much for your report. Would you agree with me that a just transition for workers is a pretty key part of any emissions reductions plan?
It's a critical part, not just a pretty key part. Yes, I agree.
I was going to say critical, but I didn't know you'd agree with that, so I'm happy. I'm happy that you do. How long had the government had plans? How much time had the government had to plan a just transition for coal workers? I believe when you gave us your briefing on Tuesday, you said that they had known about this since 2016.
Yes, so the commitment to phase out coal was announced in 2016, and then the regulations followed, and then the actual implementation, which is ongoing in Alberta already. There's already been the transition. So I would say 2016 in terms of notice from themselves, perhaps 2015 in terms of notice from the international community, because the Paris Agreement includes wording about the necessity for a just transition.
So they've had 6 or 7 years to plan for a just transition for these coal workers.
Yes.
And as a result of your analysis, you've said there was no federal implementation plan, no former governance structure, and no measuring and monitoring system. So over 7 years, they did not accomplish any of that.
Yes, they are very slow off the mark, as I mentioned in my opening statement.
And when we look at some of the things that you analyzed, so for example, the government made an announcement that they would create a pension bridging program for workers who retire earlier than planned due to the coal phase out. And they did not do anything other than make that announcement?
They relied on existing programs that were in place for other types of disruptions that people experience in their lives, unforeseen job loss and so on, but there was no tailored approach for the phase out of coal as an energy source and in terms of thermal coal mining.
Right, but they announced that they were going to have plans to protect wages and pensions. That's in your report. So They did an announcement, but didn't actually do the actual work.
Correct.
Create a detailed and publicly available inventory with labor market information pertaining to coal workers, such as skills, profiles, demographics, locations, current and potential employers. They made that commitment as well, and they did not deliver on that in the last 7 years. Is that correct?
That is correct. Now, keep in mind the period of our audit, so there have been a few developments since we closed the books on this, but you can ask the departmental officials for an update on what's happened since we closed the file, but as of the date, yes.
Right. And same thing with create a comprehensive funding program for workers staying in the labor market to address their needs across the stages of securing a new job, including income support, education, and skills building and reemployment. Known since 2015 that they would need things like that, and as of your report, nothing had been done on that either.
So I'm going to ask Ms. Leach to comment on that particular paragraph.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to point out that those are recommendations from the Just Transition Task Force for coal workers that were made back in 2018. So some of those, the task force made 10 recommendations, as we noted in our chapter, and some of them were followed through, and some of them were not.
And this is one that was not.
Yes.
Okay.
So if I could just add to that, it depends on when you start the clock. So I would say on the notion of just transition, perhaps the Paris Agreement of 2015 is when you start the clock. On the fact that there would be a coal phase out, you could start the clock in 2016. On some of these particular items, crystallized in more detail, then the date may be different. In this case, those arose more from the task force work of 2018. But in any event, we're in 2022, and it's time to expect some action as opposed to just starting up on the public consultation and so on. That's resumed since we started this audit work.
So, Mr. DeMarco, would you say that as of now, the government has failed workers in the coal industry on providing them with a just transition.
So I would say for those affected to date, the government has failed to adequately provide for a just transition. The coal phase-out continues, especially in Atlantic Canada, which is not as far ahead as Alberta, for example, in terms of phasing out coal as an energy source. So there's still time for those further stages of the coal phase-out and then the next rounds of transition that will come with the greening of the economy. So the idea of our report is to provide this early assessment to help improve this going forward, as opposed to waiting until it's all over and then finding fault or finding that it worked well. But that's the idea behind putting out our report at this early stage.
And if they don't make the changes...
We're at 6 minutes, Mr. Seaback. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I had 5 minutes and 50 seconds, but...
Well, I had 5:56, so... Anyway, if you want the 4 seconds to make a brief comment, go ahead.
No, I had a question I'm not going to get to.
Yeah, and that's why I figured we should stop there. So we'll go to Mr. Duguid.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Commissioner and his team for their good work. And as Minister Guilbeault, I think, said when you released your report, these recommendations that you've made are very, very helpful, and they're going to help keep the government on track in meeting our emissions target, but also accelerating the just transition, which you've highlighted in your report. And I, for one, appreciated you confirming that pollution pricing is key to meeting our targets, as did the PBO. I wonder if you just make a brief comment on that. But let me segue to a process question. My understanding of the process that follows after your report is tabled is that for those recommendations that are agreed to, and I think we heard yesterday that the majority are, my understanding is that departments, agencies, government entities are required to provide detailed action plan to respond to your recommendations, specific timelines, specific actions. I wonder if you could edify the committee on that front.
Thank you for that question. Our hope is that there will be detailed action plans, and if these reports are selected by the Public Accounts Committee, then that will be part of the standing order to do them. I've mentioned in a previous appearance earlier this year at this committee that because, generally speaking, all of the reports on environment and sustainable development from our office come to this committee, and only some of them go to Public Accounts Committee, that this committee could make sure that there's no gaps, this committee could require action plans from the departments as a matter of course. And if they get called to Public Accounts Committee, then they have it ready anyway. But that's something that's it's an element of accountability, that there's a potential gap if the Public Accounts Committee doesn't specifically select this report. So I would ask that the committee consider doing what you just mentioned, Mr. Duguid, in terms of requiring those action plans. Some of them do it voluntarily anyway, and some of them do it for public accounts, but it's not mandatory.
Mr. Chair, I have a suspicion that this is going to be a topic of discussion a little later in the meeting. It's one of the reasons I asked the question. But my next question, I hope I'm being heard all right. I have a new headset. Good, thank you.
Clear.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering, we had the emissions reduction plan tabled just a few weeks ago, very comprehensive, $9.1 billion. I wonder if the Commissioner could situate us in terms of the time period for your most recent set of audits. Did you take into account the 2030 emissions reduction plan? And when exactly did you sort of cut things off for your considerations of the report?
So you're referring to the new emissions reduction plan that was tabled on March 29th under the Net Zero Act. So
That's correct.
Clearly, that was off after the audit period. I think
Okay.
we were going to print probably by then. But we did put in some of the audits where it was relevant a subsequent event on the last page, and indicated that the emissions reduction plan had come out and whether that impacts things or not. We haven't done. We can't do instant audits, so we haven't done an audit of the emission reduction plan.
But you wasn't hazard an opinion on some of those measures that were in the ERP and might have addressed some of the recommendations that you've made, or will that have to wait for the next audit?
Well, we have. I could say I can comment on the ones that I'm aware of, and that I feel that I've looked at enough to provide some feedback. But it's not an audit level of assurance. It's just initial feedback.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
A minute and 25 seconds.
I'm just very curious about the whole modeling issue that you raised in your report. Natural Resources Canada had a number based on their modeling. Environment and Climate Change Canada had obviously a different model, and I think we're more conservative in their estimates of the number of megatons that could be reduced. What would your advice be in terms of reconciling models? And I think your advice would be to be cautious, and that's the spirit I got from reading your report. But what advice would you have in terms of modeling and getting it right, so that we're able to track our emissions and meet those targets that you've rightfully pointed out that governments going back 20, 30 years have missed?
We have about 20 seconds, Commissioner.
Okay, so this is an example of a part of the report that continues to be relevant with the new emissions reduction plan and any future emissions reduction plan, because it's about the process of doing realistic modeling. So from paragraph 3.51 on, there's a lot of content about that very issue. And I would say that realism is in order in terms of modeling. Perfect. Having to thread a needle that might, in a series of needles, or is a risky business. And we're saying this after having done a retrospective of 30 years of missed targets.
We'll have to go to Madame Posey now, please.
Thank you for coming here. Commissioner, I'd like to talk about hydrogen, report number 3, and what you read this morning, that natural resources, and I'm reading, that they talked about implementing an audacious and policy that does not exist. Why use hypotheses if they're false? What's the value of this hydrogen strategy if we know that it doesn't really make any sense? The response to why we do this, well, perhaps you could put this question to the department. We are recommending that the department be realistic with their hypotheses, with their action plans. The action plan has to be grounded in reality. This is important because if we want to reach our targets, we need a plan, and a plan that works. We've had 3 decades with few results, and so it will be very important that we improve. It's important for all reduction plans. I think we can't play with figures anymore. In your report, and I quote, the Department of Natural Resources has chosen to go ahead with some rather ambitious modeling figures. I find it very worrisome when the department plays with figures. We are dealing with a climate change. There's some urgency here. Yes. As you know, there are many problems with the transformative version of their strategy. The point's the same. They need to be realistic when they produce plans. It's good to be optimistic. We need to be optimistic if we want to go ahead and do something with climate change. But we have to be realistic as well. We can't base ourselves on hypotheses that are not realistic. Indeed, when I read your report, I find it difficult to really decide what's credible and what isn't. The Department of Environment and Climate Change Canada said that, well, you said they were unrealistic in drawing up their plan. How can you explain the fact that we're using these scenarios that are so optimistic and we never manage 40 years down the line to be successful? We're met with failure. Thank you. I don't know why. Perhaps this question should be put to the department, but we assess performance. And we've provided a summary of their performance. We've said they need to be realistic. We've said this many times. We said this back in our climate change report in November and in previous years as well. Previous commissioners have had similar things. Who represents the Department of Natural Resources here? There isn't anyone? I thought there would be an official here. I see that they were invited, but I don't know if they're on the phone. I don't want to lose any time here. Wouldn't we have a better chance of meeting our targets if we were a little bit more conservative? We're an audit office. We want to have conservative, precise figures, not just optimistic figures, and ones that are unrealistic. I'd like to go back to a comment. There was a colleague who had used an analogy when he said, my wife's doing dishes. She asked me to do it, but I'll do it when I feel like doing it. So do you think that we need greater accountability in these action plans? And when I read the press release of the government, I couldn't see how it tied into your report. Do you think that more needs to be done? An action plan that is better, as Mr. Duguid said, it's not just the majority of the recommendations that this applies to. All of the recommendations, with the exception of one, with respect to the greening of the government, well, they're partially in agreement with the recommendation. Yes, they do. The department does agree with our recommendations, but an action plan is more concrete. You have 7 seconds remaining. Can I add that to my 2.5-minute round? Oh, now we will now go to Ms. Collins.
So much, Mr. Chair. Mr. DeMarco, you said in your opening remarks that Canada cannot afford a fourth decade of failure on climate action, but based on the findings of all 5 of your reports, and also the one that you put out in the fall, unless the government makes a serious change in direction, would it be fair to say that that doesn't seem to be where we're headed right now?
We're providing recommendations to allow them to reach their targets. Whether they will or not is a matter for pundits and so on in terms of guessing. They have the ability and the information to do so. The question is whether the government will do so. And I'm not going to predict one way or the other. I'm motivated by the fact that they can do it.
Sorry to interrupt, just because I've got a very short amount of time. My question was more up until this point. It doesn't seem like this is where we're headed.
Yeah, I mean, that's the cover of our report number 5 from the fall. The graph has been going up since 1990, and we're the only one in the G7 that has an increase in emissions since then. So that, if that continues, now it went down a little bit in 2020, of course, during COVID and perhaps for other factors, but that trend line has to be reversed and dramatically to even come close to where the other G7 nations are.
Thank you. The Liberals promised a Just Transition Act years ago. They basically did nothing until 2021, not even mentioning it again in Parliament in that session, despite huge pressure from civil society groups. They only started work on the consultation just weeks before they called an unnecessary election. Can you just talk a little bit more about the danger to workers and to communities if they keep delaying this work?
Well, we already have an early sense of that from the first stages of the coal phase out. So there's no reason to continue delaying it. They've restarted the consultation, and hopefully they will pick up the pace. The point of our report is to document that the progress to date has been very, very limited, considering the fact that this was committed to quite some time ago. And even in a sense, Auditor General Des Hotels in 1993, in the context of the cod fishery, said that government should have a legislative basis for dealing with transitions, like the cod, but not exclusively to the cod. So they could have been putting in place some of at least the general parameters for these sorts of things long ago. But I expect that it's coming based on what I heard yesterday in terms of responses from the government.
Great. And you responded to Madame Posé's questions about the overly optimistic hydrogen estimates and the reliance on, and I'm quoting you here, non-existent policies that compromise the credibility of our expected emissions reductions. Now, if the credibility of one part of the overall emissions reduction plan is compromised, would you say that puts the overall ability of the plan to reach its targets into question?
It does, because the approach in Canada, for whatever reason, it's not the only approach to do it, but the approach in Canada has to put together a plan that adds up exactly but goes no further. And even this one, it doesn't go to 45%, even though the new target is 40 to 45%. So there's no wiggle room. So it is really like a series of needles to try to thread through. And if you don't get through one of them, then you're not going to get the target. There's also the possibility of what I call off-script things happening on the sidelines that undermine the plan. So you could even have a good plan, but then other things are other countervailing elements arise during it. So that's a lack of conservatism in the approach to planning. You have all of these elements that have to work in order for the total to make up. Putting in some buffer room, whether it be up to 45% or something like that, would make it less of a threading of a series of needles, and that's something that the government could consider in a future plan, to put in that buffer so that it doesn't have to add up exactly to the decimal point, and anything less than that would fail.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, how long do I have?
About a minute and a half.
Great. A recent report from Environmental Defence found Canada's biggest polluters are paying the lowest carbon tax rate, contributing only about 1/14 of the full carbon price. And we've heard from multiple witnesses in our study on fossil fuel subsidies that these carbon tax loopholes are like a fossil fuel subsidy. Can you speak a bit more about how the design of the large emitters program undermines the polluter pays principle?
Yeah, certainly that's a big part of report number 5 today. And most of the large emitter programs are ones approved by the federal government but put forward by the provinces or territories. So the federal government has to apply what's called a benchmark in assessing these large emitter programs across the country, and the benchmark has been very weak, and allows, for example, the approval of a system that at least promises not to increase emissions, but this is supposed to be an emissions reduction initiative. So it's a weak program, and it gives the sense to some that industry isn't paying its fair share compared to everyday Canadians, and that's one of the points in our report, that there needs to be a fairness amongst everyone who's paying the carbon levy, so that the weight, if you want to call it, the burden of the carbon levy is distributed in a proportionate way.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Chair, just before we go on, will there be an opportunity for another round of questioning?
Yes. But before we continue, I know that there are a lot of other witnesses with us today, but we don't see them on the screen. So it gives you the impression that they're not here. Perhaps everyone could turn their camera on. We have representatives from 4 departments. We know that you're with us, and if we see you, we can call on you. So we'll continue. Mr. Carey for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Mr. DeMarco. It's wonderful to see you. It's good to see someone here in front of us with Ontario experience. I know of your work with the Ontario government in the past, and I come from Oshawa, so we're a very strong industrial base. We're not just that, though. We do have Friends of the Second Marsh, so I know you're a bird watcher. If you ever come around, please let me know. I don't know if you had a chance to get down there, but I wanted to ask you 3 questions. One is a follow-up from Mr. Seaback, because in my community, Durham region, we have a large cement plant, St. Mary's Cement. And when we're looking at the government's, desire to have a just transition, there seems to be a lot of confusion, uncertainty as far as the execution and the planning of these things. I was wondering if you have come across any, let's say, options for industries that use coal, for example, whether that's the steel industry, whether that's the cement industry. Did you take a look at anything that may be options for some of these jobs in the future as far as we're looking to help these workers?
So thank you, and yes, of course, I've been to Second Marsh and McLaughlin Bay and Darlington, all of the areas along there. So happy to have that a little plug for those beautiful natural areas in the Hansard today. So yeah, I mean, for some of the building blocks of the economy, you know, steel, cement, and so on, lumber. The transition isn't going to be, you know, to stop building buildings or roads and so on. So the question for those is more, unlike, say, the coal phase out, where you're actually ceasing to use coal as an energy source, and there's a shutdown of a coal plant, for example, or a thermal coal mine. I expect that cement will continue to be produced. The question will be what fuel sources, in terms of fuel switching, what fuel sources can be used with a lower environmental footprint in terms of that industry. So I would expect that there'll be a variety of different transitions, but they won't all be like, you know, a phase out in terms of a plant shutting down and so on. Some of them will be retrofitting and changing. That actually has happened in one sense with some of the coal plants in Alberta moving to natural gas, for example, or the electrification of a steel plant, for example, in Ontario, close, not in your riding, but close by, down the way in Hamilton. That'll be happening.
Well, we actually have Gerdau Ameristeel, and they do recycling there, and they use a lot of electricity in that regard. But again, challenges and the cost of the electricity in Ontario when the Liberal government did change and the grid, there has been some challenges. I did want to ask about the rural communities. Again, when we're looking at just transition, it seems that rural communities that rely on things like fertilizer, they're getting hit with carbon tax for their hay, for example, drying hay. Usually they use propane. And I'm getting frustrated farmers talk to me about options down the road. They hear the government has all these plans, but the plan doesn't seem to include rural Canadians. Did you come across anything in that regard that would be helpful for farmers that don't have options that they see on the table?
Yeah, so in the carbon pricing report number 5, first of all, we encourage much greater transparency in the reporting on the effectiveness and the essentially the equivalency of provincial systems and so on to the federal backstop. or the federal benchmark, sorry. And we also talk about smaller and medium-sized enterprises, which would include many enterprises that are in rural areas, including agricultural enterprises, that they are disproportionately burdened. We didn't single out particular subsectors of the small and medium, but it would the recommendation for improving the fairness, I believe it's recommendation 5.79, to assess the burden of carbon pricing systems on certain groups, including Indigenous peoples. We're hoping that the department will look at whether it's initiatives on agriculture and others. It's not like it's been completely forgotten, and now that the departments have turned on their videos, you might be able to ask them a question directly. But there's a.
I just worry that there's hope, and I see hope, but people make investments on certainty, and we just don't see the just transition, the execution of it, and the planning. There's not very good communications on it, so there's a lot of people that are worried. So if you do come across best practices from other places around the world or something in future, I'd love to have you back. It's such a short visit.
On doit
Merci beaucoup.
On doit poursuivre.
We have to continue. Mr. Weiler, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also like to thank Mr. DeMarco and your team for your detailed work on these reports and recommendations for how our government can continue to improve on our environmental performance.
I think your mic is on, Mr. Weiler. I don't think your mic is on. There's a hollow here. Boom is up.
Is that
boom.
better? Is that better?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Apologies for that. So first question I have is on the report on carbon pricing, which Commissioner, you mentioned is essential. And really, in fact, it's a linchpin of Canada's climate action. But 5 years ago, there was some question about the constitutionality of the Government of Canada implementing a carbon pricing backstop. So I think we all remember the so-called resistance. And while the vast majority of credible lawyers were of the view that this measure was constitutional, but there was some risk that it may not be found so through the judicial system. And with this in mind, Commissioner, I'm curious about your thoughts on whether the Government of Canada may have been extra flexible in its approach to recognizing the industrial carbon pricing systems of the provinces to ensure that this measure would be found constitutional in order to cement that finding and that principle into law, while giving it the ability to increase the stringency of its standards over time.
Well, I can't comment on the motivation of Environment Canada for recommending to the government to approve some substandard systems. I was working in the Ontario Auditor General's office when we audited the large emitter program for Ontario, and that had been branded at the time as providing up to 2.7 megatons, but our audit looked at it and said at most it was going to only provide 1 megaton. Yet it was still approved. Whether they were approving it to try to show that they were being good, federal players, I don't know. That's up to them to answer. But there's no doubt that dealing with items of issues of national concern under the POG power in the Constitution, that this fits in it, and the Supreme Court confirmed that. It wasn't a surprise to anyone in our office that the Supreme Court found that, even despite the fact that there was a lot of rhetoric and cases in Ontario and Alberta and so on about it. But anyway, that's sort of water under the bridge now. We know that it's constitutional, and that now it's the time in this report to make adjustments so that it's more effective and more fair. And that's the next stage, and that's what our recommendations are all about.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned before, the Government of Canada has introduced a strengthened benchmark for major emitters in the summer, or last summer rather, that will come into effect for 2023 through 2030, which will be getting tougher every year. But did you look at the strengthened benchmark in your audit?
So we talk about in our paragraph 5.32 the strengthened benchmark criteria, and what you're talking about is what happened in August 2021, I believe. So yes, we did look at that, and we made recommendations throughout this report on residual problems. So that after they did the expert review in 2021, there's still some problems that remain, And those gaps are what we hope will be filled through the recommendations we made and through the responses and eventually, hopefully, action plans from Environment Canada. So the idea is to make it effective and fair. The theory of carbon pricing is obviously well accepted across the world, even though there are those who oppose it. But it works as a mechanism. This is about doing it right.
Absolutely. Well, I want to switch gear to your report on hydrogen, and really the difference in the figures given by ECCC and NRCan, which are obviously very different agencies. ECCC more of a regulatory agency, and NRCan more of an economic ministry. ECCC only modeled blending hydrogen with natural gas, which, in my opinion, is maybe not the most effective use of hydrogen, where electrification, for instance, may be possible. But rather, hydrogen can help in hard-to-abate areas like freight and heavy transport, among others. And so NRCan took a more holistic approach to looking at the roles that hydrogen can play, which, in my opinion, leads to a larger share of emissions reductions. And you mentioned in your testimony earlier that we should be using conservative and precise figures. But for a technology like hydrogen, which is rapidly progressing, how would you advise or recommend government to estimate the future potential for emissions reduction for these types of emerging technologies?
We have 20 seconds, Mr. DeMar.
In 20 seconds, that might be a challenge, especially since I just used a few of them now. But especially for 2030, we found it to be unrealistic. For the 2050 horizon, obviously technology is going to be much different than it is today between now and 2050. We'd like to see realistic numbers for both, but then it is more predictable the shorter the time horizon.
Thank you. Madame Posé.
Thank you. I'm pleased to see that there are people from National Resources Canada. My question's for them. I'll start with a little joke. There's an accounting firm that wants to hire someone. First candidate is asked what? He says he's not hired. The second candidate says 1 + 1 makes 1. He says 2 + 2, but maybe something else. He's not hired. And the third candidate, what is 1 and 1? And he says, what do you want? What do you want me to say is the answer? So I think that sometimes the Department of Natural Resources reacts the same way. What's the figure? Okay, we'll make sure that we get to that. So I asked a question of the commissioner earlier. In all seriousness, it seems to me there are more and more people coming out questioning the seriousness of your work. Do you feel that just changing the figures like this, that you're coming up with a strategy that just isn't credible? Who would like to answer? Yes, thank you. Thank you for your question. I hear an echo. Can you hear me okay? Thank you for your question. I think that, first of all, I'd like to clarify that the strategy for hydrogen is not a plan. There are no programs involved. It's a call for action. It's to look at the opportunities in the Canadian economy. And the document that we produced after 3 years of consultation with the private sector, the academic sector, and the provinces, it's not a, I'm going to stop you there because I did look at the Canadian hydrogen strategy, but do you bear in mind how we use hydrogen? Hydrogen is not being used for green energy. Was that taken into account? Because we know that only green hydrogen does not produce gashouse emissions. Yes, that was taken into consideration. We looked at a full range of technologies that continues to evolve. When we talk about carbon capture and the process, I perhaps should turn to my colleague, Aaron Huskin, to talk to you about that. But yes, we looked at all the processes involved. And yes, there is a lot of variability. about with respect to carbon intensity and these various technologies. If you wish, we can continue, perhaps a little bit later. You have 1 minute and a half, Ms. Collins.
Collins?
Oh, thank you. When it comes to greening government's the greening government strategy, crown corporations aren't required to report on their emissions. It's voluntary. You found there isn't quality information on their emissions. So I guess it may be hard to say without that data how much of the overall emissions picture we're missing. But do you have a sense kind of how big that piece of the pie is that we're missing?
Yeah, yes, we do. That's Exhibit 2.3 of report number 2. So Crown corporations, the 3 big ones in terms of emissions, Canada Post included. We have an estimation of emissions being 1.28 megatons, 1,286 kilotons. So that is in the report. So we have a sense of what they're emitting. We don't have a sense of what they're going to do to bring those emissions down.
Thanks so much. And Mr. Chair, you said I just have 1.5 minutes.
About that, yeah.
Okay, well then potentially, since it's been raised a couple times, I did circulate a motion in advance of this committee meeting, and Mr. DeMarco recently just said in response to Mr. Duguid's question that he would recommend that this committee pass a motion. It's a motion that the Standing Committee on Public Accounts has adopted since 2009, requires organizations audited to provide a detailed action plan. And so I'm hoping we can pass a similar motion. I would like to move it now.
One moment, please. I'm just going to stop the clock.
Right from that exhibit, I was looking down quickly. Crown corporations, 1,286 kilotons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Sorry about that.
Sort of stopping the clock for a second to deal with Ms. Collins' motion. The motion is being distributed in both official languages at the moment for those who are on screen.
And while we're waiting, would you like me to read it out?
Sure.
Okay. That all organizations that have been subject to a performance audit by the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development provide a detailed action plan to address the audit recommendations which have been agreed to, including specific actions, timelines for their completion, and responsible individuals. To the committee and the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development within 6 months of the audit being tabled in the House of Commons, that organizations that are invited to appear before the committee to discuss the findings of an audit should provide an action plan to the committee no later than 48 hours prior to the hearing, that action plans and progress reports received by the committee be published on the committee's website.
Okay, so we're basically suspending the meeting to deal with this motion.
And I'm hoping that we could pass it by unanimous consent very quickly.
That's your request? What
would be my request.
What do members think? Yes, Mr. Longfield?
I think I would like to see the action plans. I sat on public accounts, and those were extremely helpful in knowing how the departments were going to be handling the recommendations and that they've agreed to. In terms of committee time and saying that we want all the departments to come in and speak with us, I think that's a little bit of a separate issue that maybe we could consider inviting people as we need to, as the committee agrees. Looking at our schedule going forward and saying that we're going to agree to all these departments that are now in front of us on the screen to come and talk to us, I think might be jumping the gun a bit. But I definitely would like to see the reports of the action plans coming to us. So I would suggest an amendment to the motion that the committee consider inviting the departments as needed.
Could you give me some language for that?
Sure, that the second part of the motion, that the organizations are invited to appear before the committee, that I would take that around and say that the committee consider inviting organizations to discuss the findings.
Okay, that the committee.
I would put it in control of the committee, so that the committee consider inviting organizations to appear to discuss findings of the audit.
Just a second, let me write this down. The committee consider inviting organizations.
To discuss the findings.
Mr. Chair, just a point of clarification. I think Mr. Longfield may have read the motion, or maybe when I read it out, it wasn't clear. It's that organizations that are invited to appear before the committee.
That's right. So it doesn't, we're not inviting anybody.
It does not require, it does not require us to invite all of them. It's the exact same motion as public accounts uses, and so it would be the same procedure that you would experience there.
Okay, thanks. So that's
so you'll
these
draw
last
that
minute
amendment?
motions. Thanks for clarifying.
Okay, Mr. Dreeshen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had wanted to make that particular point as well. But what we do have handed out and what Ms. Collins had read are two different things. And it says to the committee and the commissioners within 6 months of the audit. That what she had indicated is the commissioner of the environment and so on. So I would think that that should, what she had read should be the part that is included, the part that was just distributed.
Change what I have on paper here.
I would listen to what Laurel had said when she talked about and the commissioner of
the environment and
yes.
sustainable development.
Okay. Whereas, and what I have in English.
Well, that's just a friendly amendment, I think.
Absolutely.
Do you accept that, Ms. Collins? Just instead of saying the commissioner, that the commissioner of the environment and sustainable development within 6 months of the audit. So we're just specifying that it's Mr. DeMarco, basically.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
I
okay.
think what I read out was the commissioner.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So based on this brief discussion, do members want to adopt this motion? Agreed. Seems to be unanimous. Okay, perfect. Thanks. We'll continue. Ms. Collins, you have, you basically have a little under a minute here, about probably 50 seconds. So please go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if I could make a friendly amendment to my amended response. I forgot about scope 1 and 2 emissions for Crown corporations, which are a different exhibit, 2.2. So that's another 397 kilotons in addition to what I said before.
Okay, Ms. Collins, you have 45 seconds.
Thanks so much. And just in terms of the other things that are missing from our government greening government strategy, indirect emissions, these emissions from Crown corporations, if you were to kind of compare with the rest of the greening government strategy, do we have a sense of what the percentage is that we might be missing? Is it the majority that we're missing?
Briefly, please, Commissioner.
Yes, the majority is missing.
Thank you.
Are we good, Ms. Collins? Yeah. Okay. Mr. Mazier for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And Commissioner and your team, thank you very much for the work you do. It really is appreciated from this MP anyways. I'm going to be referring to report number 5. Did you, on carbon pricing, did your audit find that the government's carbon pricing had a disproportionate impact on certain Canadians? Yes. And did this include Canadians living in rural, remote, northern, and Indigenous communities?
The groups that how we describe them in terms of the examples we gave were in starting at paragraph 5.70, Indigenous groups and smaller enterprises still disproportionately burdened. And I think I said in response to an earlier question, we didn't break down smaller and medium enterprises, for example, into subcategories like agricultural and so on.
But rural. Or rural, right?
There would be many rural enterprises that would be small and medium, yes, but not all of them. Yeah.
Okay. And did this include low-income Canadian households?
In the Indigenous example, we talk about low-income households and Indigenous people having a lower tax filing rate, and because in the areas where the federal backstop applies on the consumer levy, that you need to have a tax return to be able to get the checks that are coming out in July now. It used to be on your tax return in terms of a refundable tax credit. So yeah, that lower income and Indigenous people who have a lower tax filing rate will necessarily disproportionately be burdened because they aren't getting that rebate if they don't file.
Okay. One of the objectives of the audit was to determine if the government's carbon pricing system was fair. If the government doesn't address this disproportionate impact of their carbon tax, what are some of the negative consequences on Canadians in these communities?
There are several. One is that they'll be paying more than their fair share compared to others. So that would be within the consumer levy, you could have disproportionate impacts, for example, on Indigenous communities, and then across the two elements in terms of the large emitter program at the federal level, the OBPS, and so across that and the consumer-based carbon levy. So there's two types of fairness there, within and across.
And then disproportionate on affordability as well, probably?
I don't think we talk about how that affects their net income and their individual balance sheets, but it's a question of fairness in terms of how much they're paying vis-a-vis others.
Okay. So as you know, the government is raising the carbon tax to $170 a ton despite promising not to. Has this government assessed how this significant increase will impact Canadians?
I think the department's here, so when you have questions for the department, maybe they could answer directly.
And I guess I'm referring to paragraph 5.67. It's right in the report. It basically summarizes that.
So our finding, but as of the date of this audit, we had found that they had not assessed the effects of the price increase from 50 to 170. I thought you're asking whether they have done that since the audit period, which you could direct the question to the department.
Okay, well, no, this just looking at your audit. So Canadians living in rural and remote communities are already experiencing the unfairness of the carbon tax today, never mind about when it reaches 170, right? So if the government hasn't bothered to analyze the impacts of the significantly higher carbon tax, don't you think that the Canadians will continue to disproportionately be impacted by the government?
Well, that's one of the concerns we have as well, because their next review, I believe, is 2026, which is quite a ways from now. So our recommendation is that they speed up that, both from a fairness and effectiveness point of view, but also to not unnecessarily create debate over something that, if done well, should work. So if they can bring people along on this by demonstrating the effectiveness and the fairness, why wait till 2026 to do that?
Yes, good. And you mentioned in your report that measures such as, quote, targeted exemptions could be used to mitigate and navigate effects of the carbon tax. So do you believe that the government should consider this?
They already do have several, and maybe too many at the large emitter side, but we'll talk about that another time perhaps. But yeah, there are other exemptions too for certain types of agricultural fuels, but not all of them. I think someone was talking about propane for drying grain, but on the diesel side there are. So you could get the full list from the department, but there have been some exemptions already, and exemptions as well for certain remote communities in terms of energy sources.
Thank you
very much.
Mr. Longfield.
Thanks to all the witnesses for being here from the departments, as well as Mr. DeMarco. It's great to see you again. In terms of your processes from the Commissioner's office, how frequently are you going to be doing audits like this? What's your next audit in this area, and how would that interact with the audits that you'll be doing on the act that we passed last June on accountability, on climate change accountability?
Yeah, good question. It's one that we're thinking about in the Commissioner as part of the Office of the Auditor General. So it's a whole of office approach, and many of the principals here also work on other audits for the Auditor General. So just wanted to make it clear that it's one office. So we have the new mandate from the Net Zero Act to look at a very specific aspect of climate change mitigation. Obviously, we do audits on climate change regardless of that having passed in June, and we've been doing that for 20 years. But we are now assessing what we should do differently in order to implement that new directive, which I believe is in around 24 or 23 of the Net Zero Act. I don't have the act in front of me, but hopefully I'm in the ballpark. So we'll assess our options for that and whether we will report perhaps even more frequently than the minimum required under that legislation.
Great, thank you. Because the 2026 number you just mentioned was one that stood out to me. I know we're moving forward some of our accountability pieces on getting to a net zero electric grid. There are things that are going to be happening within a shorter time frame now. Has the department, or maybe I could ask the department, whether Environment and Climate Change is looking at 2026 as a negotiable date.
Who would like to answer?
Mr. Moffat or me?
Perhaps I could ask, what do you mean by negotiable in what sense?
Well, whether it's within the possibility to move 2026 forward, it was a recommendation in the audit itself. I know you'll be doing an action plan. Hopefully we'll see an action plan coming that might address this, but initial reaction.
If you're referring to, sorry, there's a big echo. I wonder if somebody's not on mute. I'll try.
Could you try again, Mr. Moffat?
Sure. So thanks. I still have an echo. I wonder if it's my system. Can you hear me?
So all the mics here are closed, are shut. So
Okay. So the echo's gone, I guess. So the 2026, I think that you're referring to is our commitment to do an interim review of the new benchmark criteria, and we don't plan to do that earlier than 2026. We plan to start it well before 2026, but the idea would be what we've done is we've established criteria for pricing systems for the period 2023 to 2030, so a much longer period than we had in place before for pricing. We're trying to provide as much certainty as possible, but we recognize that that we're in a dynamic policy space and things may change, and that there may be a need to kind of provide an update on at some point. However, we don't want to signal that change may occur within the next couple of years. So hence we've selected 2026 as a commitment, and at the moment don't have any plans to change or to accelerate that.
The audit has pointed out that the benchmark system is in need of strengthening, and that especially on large emitters, and so that would be an interesting point for a longer discussion. But it's a concern that I would have, looking at what we have in front of us.
Could I just respond to that? The audit also acknowledges, however, that we have strengthened the benchmark criteria. So what I'm referring to is the new benchmark criteria that were put in place after the audit was concluded for 2023 to 2030.
And what I'm looking at is the benchmarking with the provinces to see whether their systems are robust enough. And I know that we've had a lot of disagreements even up to the Supreme Court in terms of this legislation, and whether we now have the right benchmarking with the provinces.
Maybe the answer could come a bit later, but we'll go now to Mr. Dreeshen for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of the witnesses. Earlier on, Mr. DeMarco, you had said that there's an intergenerational crisis that we're dealing with, and since I've heard of it for the last 50 years, I agree with you. It has been an international or intergenerational crisis. So some of the doom and gloom, of course, is sort of on the Nostradamus type level. What I would like to talk about, we're trying to take a look at the full life cycle of some of these new types of technologies, solar, wind, hydrogen, and so on. And I know you may not have that information, some of that information in front of you, but I certainly think that is something that it would be good to have a look at later, because we just take these little snapshots of what this technology will do. We don't look at the mining requirements. We don't look at the infrastructure for electricity. We don't look at what would be required for batteries and so on. So I think, and there's no energy source that doesn't require that type of an analysis, whether it be hydro or whatever. They all require that. So I'm hopeful that will take the place. And on page, let's see, report 1, page 9, you have spoken about other countries and their governance structures and how we are to coordinate our activities. We deal with North American countries, so obviously Mexico and and the U.S. are critical to that which we are trying to do. They're trading partners. And I'm curious as how you might consider the incorporation of carbon taxes into their national economic structure, and how they are managing these costs when it comes to exports and imports, because they are our competition, they are our partners in so many ways in the supply chain. Was any of that put into your analysis on Exhibit 1.2 when you were speaking to what other countries are doing, or was it strictly to describe the fact that they had carbon pricing?
Thank you. So you're talking about 1.2, which is the Just Transition report?
Yeah. Report 1, Exhibit 1.2, page 9.
Right. Exhibit 1.2, okay.
It speaks to the European Union, New Zealand, and Scotland. Obviously, places like Australia aren't there, as they have made some changes. And the same thing, we don't have our actual partners of the U.S. and Mexico in that analysis.
Okay. Yeah, so this report is confined to the just transition for workers when there is disruption going to be, like, something like the coal phase out. It's not about carbon pricing, which is covered in number 5. But I do want to say that your point at the beginning about looking at the full life cycle, and I agree 100%, because every source of energy has some sort of impact, whether it's visible out of a stack or whether it's more upstream in terms of the production of the materials. That was, in another context, that need for a full cost accounting or a net look at things was a critical component of our emissions reduction fund analysis, that look at the big picture and compare. And for a global issue like climate change, that also can mean what the emissions are once the material is shipped and it combusted elsewhere and so on. So a full life cycle, full cost accounting, I agree 100%.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And the other aspect of it, of course, is we see what is happening in China and India, the coal that is being used, and of course the issues that are taking place in Eastern Europe now as they are transitioning back to coal. How is that reality of what is happening in the world going to affect the targets? Are we going to be then expected to do even more than we are at this point in time because the rest of the world has decided that they have to look at their realities?
So it's hard to predict if you factor in not only the lack of progress on emissions reductions, but then you bring in the geopolitical elements and all of that. I can't say that. You mentioned Nostradamus. I can't give you a prediction on how that will go. The general trend, and this is well recognized by the parties to the Paris Agreement and the International Energy Agency, is towards more renewables and obviously fewer emissions. The pathways that will go there, country by country, I can't predict.
Just one last point while I have 20 seconds left. Alberta's Technology Innovation and Emissions Reduction Program, which people don't quite realize has been there for 20 years, that is taking high emission, from high emissions businesses and so on. That has done some amazing work and innovation that can be sold around the world. Did you do any analysis of that when you were talking, for example, about your hydrogen plan?
A yes or no, please, Commissioner, because we're at the 5-minute mark.
Pardon me?
A yes or no.
We don't audit provincial programs, so that would be something to raise with the Auditor General's Office of Alberta. But I'll leave it there.
Thanks. Thank you. Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today and for the work that you've done on these reports. It's very important to track how we're actually doing. And one of the things about being near the end is that so much has been said that I now want to follow up on. It's kind of hard, but I did want to first go back to Mr. Mazier's comments about your findings on the disproportionate impact of the carbon, the price on pollution. And what I heard you saying was that the segments or the sectors that you have identified as disproportionately impacted were the small and medium enterprises and the Indigenous groups, especially those who did not submit tax returns. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's paragraph 5.70 and onwards.
Okay. So Mr. Mazier had said a couple of times that it was rural and remote that were affected disproportionately. Was that one of your findings? It was all rural and remote areas?
I think in my answer I was saying that within the category of small and medium enterprises, some of those will be in rural and remote.
But some will also be.
We didn't categorize it in the same way that he did in his question. So I'll just direct you to the wording of the report in terms of what we did and didn't look at. It doesn't stop Environment Canada from subcategorizing that when it's assessing the disproportionate burden in its response to our recommendation. They could drill down into some of the categories such as rural, agricultural. That may be very helpful.
Yeah, I understand, but your report doesn't say it disproportionately affects rural and remote. It says that it disproportionately affects Indigenous people who, especially lower income, who don't file tax returns, and small and medium enterprises, which could be across the country, urban, et cetera.
Yes, and Ms. Leach has something to add to this.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry. Yes, thanks for the question. And yes, so paragraph 5.66 in our chapter actually talks about the fact that the federal government has made efforts to address the burden of carbon pricing in rural and remote communities. For example, they provided some exemptions to the federal fuel charge for aviation fuels in the territories, in the north, for example. Mm-hmm. And they've also provided an additional 10% payment to the baseline climate action incentive payment. And that is mentioned in paragraph 5.69. So there is a little bit of
so quite contrary to saying that it's disproportionately affecting rural and remote. In fact, it's saying that they have addressed that issue in some of the measures. And as well, I saw that the Indigenous governments right now, that they are working currently with their Indigenous partners to come up with other ways to address this. So I'm assuming that because there are two things happening, and when I look from a data perspective, if small and medium enterprises are being disproportionately affected, I'm thinking that's because the large emitters aren't paying their fair share. Would that be a correct conclusion?
Yeah, that's one of the conclusions that you could reach, and there's also some issues about whether the Climate Action Incentive Fund money is getting out the door and so on. But yeah, that relative burden between large emitters and everybody else, that's a key point. Yes.
So if the provinces actually strengthen the programs to apply this price on pollution to large emitters, that would help to equalize the burden then between small and medium enterprises and large emitters.
Yeah, it has that beneficial effect, and it also is more consistent with the polluter pays principle, which is one of the tenets of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which gives rise to the methane regulations and so on. So it has a number of benefits: fairness, consistency with policy, what we call policy coherence in our fall report. So there's a lot of benefits to updating it to make it more effective and more fair.
Right. So then if certain provinces are worried about their rural or remote communities, they could actually address the in disparity by increasing the price on pollution on the large emitters, and that would help with the sub-segments of that might be in their province of those small and medium enterprises or the Indigenous people.
So we looked at Environment Canada's assessment of the provincial programs and whether they should be recommended to government for approval. The provinces themselves that wish to have their own large emitter programs, which is many of them, they can propose something that is more fair. We're looking at, because we're the Federal Auditor General's office, we're looking at what Environment Canada did as its part of the equation, but the provinces that have their own large emitter programs, they can address these, and hopefully they'll be reading this report as well, because they're the ones that are putting forward proposals for approval or disapproval by the federal government as part of the backstop or benchmarking process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Your time is up. Ms. Posey, 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. Mr. DeMarco, we know that the federal strategy for sustainable development requires that we triple the number of reports, but unfortunately there's a conflict with current employees and they are alluding to pay inequity. These jobs are very precious. I've always defended the rights of workers, so I hope that this will quickly come to a halt and that there will be a fair decision for the employees' demands. Do you think that we're going to be reducing the number of reports until this labor conflict has been resolved? I have good news. It's now resolved. All the employees have come back to work. we have a star team. I'm very pleased that the employees have come back. I am as well. One of the first questions that was asked by Mr. Seaback for this fair transition, I can remember the UN Auditor General said that there will be no transition if the employees are not asked to participate, and we need to help them. And your report points out that the federal government has done nothing on this matter. We go back to 1992, when we had the whole cod issue, and we didn't do enough to help the fishers in the community. What we need to do for this just transition, we have to think about the people living in the fossil fuel sectors. We don't want them to have the same problem as the fishers did. Yes, there are similarities and differences between these two scenarios. We're not dealing with the same thing here exactly. But the lessons that we can draw from this time period is that we need to learn from our history so that we can talk about real equity. We're not dealing with apples and oranges here. Here, there are some communities working in the coal sector that will be hit, and we can create strategies to support them and deal with the situation. Thank you very much. Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. DeMarco, you've outlined that while big polluters are being let off the hook, you found that Indigenous communities and small businesses were disproportionately being burdened by the carbon pricing system. And my Liberal colleague was emphasizing what the provinces could do about it. But aren't there concrete actions that the federal government could take to address this?
Yes, it's a whole of society issue, climate change, so that we're talking mostly about the federal role today. But in this particular area, it's obviously an area of shared jurisdiction and a system that contemplates the possibility of a patchwork of programs in Canada. So the federal government can do, the easiest things they can do is to implement the recommendations that they've agreed to in our report. I'll leave it at that rather than going into them by detail because we have not that much time left.
Great. You mentioned that we don't have any wiggle room in the plan to reduce emissions, and lacking credibility on the hydrogen strategy undermines the credibility of our whole emissions plan. Would you say the same thing for infrastructure? If Infrastructure Canada isn't able to account for the emissions reductions of the projects it's funding, does that not also draw into question whether the government will actually be able to achieve the emissions reductions they've promised?
So the infrastructure program we looked at is more about funding for new roads, new bridges, new buildings, and so on. Perhaps not roads, but buildings and bridges and so on. So it's not so much an emission reduction initiative in the same sense of some of the other ones we've been talking about. It's about minimizing the emissions and maximizing the resilience of new projects that are coming on stream. But it's true, if you put a bunch of new infrastructure in for buildings that have high emissions, then that could affect the overall total. But that program, we're not looking at it really as a component of the emissions reduction plan. It's looked at it more from a value for money in terms of the funding that Infrastructure Canada is doing for essentially trying to green up infrastructure.
Great. And can you remind the committee how much money that we're talking about when we're talking about Infrastructure Canada's funding? Is it 12 billion?
Yeah, there's 4 programs that are listed in the report, starting at 4.3 and going to 4.4. The first one is 33 billion, and so on. I don't want to go through all the whole paragraphs, but Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund, the Green and Inclusive Community Buildings Program, and the Smart Cities Challenge. And it adds up into close to 40 billion.
Thank you.
40 billion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll go now to Mr. Carey, who will be splitting with Mr. Mazier, I believe.
that, do you think we'll have time for a full round, Madam Clerk? Or Chair?
Yes, we will.
Okay, then I'll take probably the full time then.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you again, Mr. Commissioner. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the just transition, the execution, and again, coming from Oshawa, I want to talk about cars and maybe get your opinion, because I do know of your experience with the Ontario government. GM is investing in new electric cars, and the government is supportive of that, and that's all and good. But I was wondering, when you looked at infrastructure, did you actually look at the grid and the sustainability of the electrical grid in this country? The reason I'm asking is I've actually had people concerned that if Canadians go out now and buy one technology, electric cars, and start plugging them in, can our electrical grids even handle that? And is it possible perhaps that the federal government can partner with provinces that may have challenges in that regard?
So we looked at that in the fall, not in the spring report. So that's the lessons learned report, where if there's going to be a big push for electrification based on more renewable sources, there's no point in going to electrification if you're not also doing it with renewable sources or low emitting sources and so on. But if that happens, then obviously the grid has to be able to absorb that. So that's key. I think there's going to be a need for more cooperation in terms of an energy strategy that the federal government and the provinces and territories work on together to make sure that if we're going to electrify many of our, not just vehicles, but certain types of industry as well, that we have not only the capacity but a grid that can absorb that and also distribute it where the power demands are.
Well, and again, if we can bring it back to jobs, I know when industry makes investments, sometimes they're looking 10 years out. I know other countries, for example, in the automotive sector, they are looking directly at hydrogen. I know auto sector has looked at hydrogen fuel cells, and other countries have put in infrastructure where you can actually fuel up your cars on hydrogen. Now, the current government appears to be picking winners and losers, and we're putting so much into this electrification, which I think down the road with provinces could be problematic. But do you think that if we don't put in more of this infrastructure, it's going to start to affect our competitiveness and our ability to attract investment into this country?
Yeah, so the greening of the economy is a worldwide trend, as I alluded to earlier, and the slower that we get on board with that, the potential for what you just described becomes more realistically possible, which is that we would be left behind in that transition. I'm not talking about the just transition for workers. I'm not talking about the energy transition. So it's important for Canada to be a leader in this transformation as opposed to a follower. I would agree with that. Yes.
Well, I am looking at your experience in Ontario as well, because when I talk to industry, there appears to be, with the plan of the government, a mishmash. And I think you mentioned in one of your answers how different parts of the country have different rules and regulations. And I know, for example, Quebec is different than Ontario, which is different than British Columbia, as far as the automotive sector is concerned. So when we're looking at a just transition and keeping jobs in Canada, how important is it for the federal government to take a leadership role to make sure that the regulatory framework in this country is consistent across the country? Because Canada, we're a small population relative to our neighbor down south. And if they can figure it out, if we don't, I'm just worried about the job losses. And job losses means there is no just transition.
30 seconds, please.
So Canada is a federal state, so there's always more challenging to deal with than in other models. On issues of national concern or international concern, like the climate crisis or the biodiversity crisis, the federal government clearly has to take a leadership role, and also not only within Canada, but in terms of partnering across the borders, which was alluded to by one of the other
Thank you. Thank
members.
you. Thanks. Mr. Duguid. Mr. Duguid?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just coming off mute, and I am hearing an echo now. You can hear me all right? Okay. Mr. Chair, most of my questions have been answered, but I wonder if I could give both Environment and Climate Change Canada and Natural Resources Canada staff who are here just an opportunity to comment on the emissions reduction plan, $9.1 billion we just introduced through the budget and through the ERP that was released by the minister a few weeks ago, but perhaps give them an opportunity to highlight what in some of the things in the ERP that have shored up some of the shortfalls that have been pointed out by the commissioner. I asked a similar question of the commissioner, but it's perhaps more appropriate to ask the departments this. We've made some progress. What is that progress on, again, shoring up some of these shortfalls that the commissioner has pointed out?
Who would like to take that? Would someone from ECCC like to take that?
Perhaps I could start, Mr. Chair. So, without getting into all the details that are provided in the 2030 emission reduction plan, I think the key point is that it represents the current plan. It does indeed take some steps to address at least some of the recommendations made by the commissioner. And so I would address two, and maybe can turn to my colleagues from other departments to talk about the others. So in terms of the modeling projections in the 2030 emission reduction plan represent a much more detailed set of inputs and rely less on some background assumptions, as was the case in the earlier plan, including the assumptions that we needed to make about the likely impact of the forthcoming hydrogen strategy, for example. So the annex is available for everybody to read, and if the committee is interested, we'd be happy to come and talk about the annex and the modeling annex and the assumptions in it at a later date. And on carbon pricing, I think the key, we agree with the findings of the review of the audit and the four recommendations, and indeed are committed to develop and publish a written plan to respond to those four recommendations. And it's our view that we've already started to respond to those recommendations primarily through the new benchmark criteria. So the basic approach to carbon pricing has been to develop criteria for provinces for all pricing systems, federal, provincial, and territorial. And inherent in the development of those criteria is the inevitability that there will be differences among systems. If there was a desire to have one system, then we would only have one system. But we've acknowledged that provinces were early movers, and we've acknowledged that provinces need to have the ability to take action to address in ways that address their own circumstances. So the bottom line is these criteria are significantly tighter, provide longer term certainty, and should go a long way to addressing some of the discrepancies that the commissioner pointed to. And in addition, we've published input on our advice to all jurisdictions about revenue use, so that revenue return can be used, among other things, to offset some of the potential impacts on vulnerable communities.
Okay.
I'll stop
Thank you.
there.
We'll have to stop there and go on to our last round, where I will reduce the time for each member to say 3.5 minutes, and that way we'll land on time. Mr. Mazier?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, as you know, the federal government provides a 10% tax rebate supplement for Canadians living in rural communities. And are you aware if the government has conducted an analysis to determine if the 10% supplement fairly covers the increased costs of living for Canadians in rural, remote communities? Are you aware of it, I guess is the...
So, sorry about that. I'm just removing my mask. I'm going to turn to Ms. Leach for that. It's an example of an initiative to address the potential for disproportionate. Yes, of course.
I'm on a reduced time here.
Yeah.
So the government admitted at this committee that no study or assessment was conducted to determine whether the 10% supplement was fair for rural Canadians. I'll read the words of the finance official, and I quote, "It is not based on any scientific assessment. The government has decided it's appropriate in this context," end quote. Isn't that concerning to you? And why haven't you considered this in the carbon pricing audit?
So the question of have they addressed it at all is one, and then I think your question is it effective in actually leveling the playing field? So you could say that we get this 10%, but is that in any way proportionate to the burden that would be there? That's what you're asking, I think.
Well, it's not based off of scientific data. Like that is probably the more concerning thing. Like this is supposed to be a plan to reduce emissions that are scientifically proven, that we know we have a problem, but yet there's no data for this communities or for anybody having other questions about this plan.
Yeah, so that's what we're hoping occurs with recommendation 5.79. So we haven't listed every type of group that could be disproportionately impacted, but we're asking Environment Canada to assess the burden of carbon pricing systems on certain groups, including Indigenous people. So just because you have an initiative like the 10%, it doesn't mean that reflects the reality of the disproportion. So they have to calibrate it, not just put in a program, but calibrate it to the affected population. So hopefully we will see that in the action plan arising from 5.79.
Calibrated off of scientific data, not just pull it from there.
It's not just science. There's demographics. There's a bunch of things there, but yeah.
And so this is going back to report 1 on page 23. Could you provide the committee with the documentation on how you determine the number of communities and jobs dependent on emission-intensive sectors? That's in report 1.
Yes. So we have two sets of numbers, one for coal specifically, and then one for direct jobs in fossil fuel. So I believe that was from the study. Pardon me?
Is that documentation you just presented to the committee? That would be...
Yeah, if you could send it to the clerk for distribution.
Okay, we'll send it.
That would be great. Okay,
Perfect.
We'll go now to Mr. Weiler for 3.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to pick up on the hydrogen report again. And Commissioner, I'm just wondering if in your modeling here, if you looked at the impact of the Clean Fuels Fund, the Net Zero Accelerator Fund, the Clean Fuel Standard, or the zero emissions vehicle mandates, including for medium and heavy duty vehicles, when you're looking at the overall emissions reduction potential for hydrogen by 2030?
Thank you. I'll turn to Mr. Le Goff for the answer to that question.
So, Mr. Chair, the plan will be to do a follow-up on this audit and look at those programs.
Okay, thank you very much. And I can understand that this must be a very tricky area to make an accurate assessment, because a lot of these programs are not specific to one particular technology. They could be electricity, could be biofuels, could be a lot of other low carbon or net zero fuels. And so I actually asked this question in my first round of questioning, but there was only about 20 seconds of time. So, Commissioner, I would like to give you the opportunity to really maybe explain in a little bit more detail for these emerging technologies, whether it's hydrogen or otherwise, what would be the best method for assessing the emissions reductions potential for those technologies?
So thank you. You're right. I mean, it is a bit of a challenge because it's a moving target in a lot of these issues, but that's a good thing. It means that things are happening, and so it may make it messier for auditing because the things happen after the close of our books. But it's better than nothing happening in terms of addressing the climate crisis. So we deal with the moving target, and then as we can within the context of our standards and so on. With respect to what can be done to increase the effectiveness and transparency of modeling, that's the whole last third of our report. So I can't really summarize it, especially in the lightning round or whatever we call the third round, but it just directs you to the last third of the report, and you can see our recommendations in that regard.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'll switch gears a little bit to the Just Transition report. And in that report, you made the analogy of the threat towards folks working in the fossil fuel sector to the Atlantic cod collapse that we experienced. And as part of that, you made the case that 150,000 Canadian jobs are at risk as part of this. So I was wondering how you came to that particular figure, and whether you think that the transition, whether that will be abrupt or this will be something that will be more done over time with perhaps pathways for some of the folks that are working in that industry to transition to other areas.
We have only 20 seconds, so you could get started, I guess, and we can continue the answer.
So we'll provide the background study that came up with the numbers. I think it was 170,000 rather than 150, but you're in the ballpark. So yeah, it's the coal phase out is quite obvious. Plants closing, and the rest of the just transition or the energy transition will not be quite so identifiable community by so and so on. So there are differences between cod and coal, and then there's differences between coal and the others.
Thanks. Madame Posey, vous avez 2 minutes.
2 minutes, Ms. Posey. 2 minutes, 2 questions. Mr. DeMarco, we talked about unreliable information, incomplete information, unrealistic hypotheses. Commissioner, are you optimistic for the future? I have to be optimistic in this job. I have children, and so I have to be optimistic for them as well. But as I said, I'm not in a position. I can't predict. I know that it's possible to do this, but we need the will to do so. My last question is for the Department of the Environment and Climate Change. There are some very worrisome issues that are brought out in the report. They talked about unrealistic hypotheses, and we talked about 30 years of failure. Can that be explained by the current practices that we have in the Department of the Environment, which bases itself on unrealistic hypotheses? Are you of the fact that the Commissioner's observations undermine the trust of the public and has an impact on the optimism of the general public? A very brief response, please. I don't know who wants to answer the question, but
just with respect to Environment Climate Change Canada's modeling is done according to UNFCCC reporting guidelines and is reviewed internationally. And also we look at, the best available data, the best available cost curves that are out there that underline the projections we do in the model.
Thank you. Ms. Collins for 2 minutes, please.
Thanks so much. And my first question is around the difference between Environment and Climate Change Canada and Natural Resources Canada. They had such a huge difference in their estimates around the amount of greenhouse gas reductions from hydrogen. This seems like a big disconnect between two departments that need to be working closely together for climate solutions. Mr. DeMarco, can you tell me a little bit about your concern around this gap?
Yes, so we have, two ships passing in the night, one with 45 megatons on it and one with 15. I would hope going forward that because we have a Canadian emissions reduction plan, that we don't have different departments going off and doing their own thing, and one saying, well, we're trying to be optimistic and transformational, and that's why ours is different and so on. We have one Canada and one plan at the national level. We don't need to be spending taxpayer money with different competing plans from different departments.
Thank you so much. And to Environment and Climate Change Canada, can you explain the gap, kind of this huge disparity and disconnect between your department and Natural Resources when you should be working very closely on climate solutions?
Maybe I can start that. So the gap arises in a lot of circumstances in that when measures are developed, it's generally possible to develop sort of a very rudimentary assessment of the likely emission reductions associated with a measure. That initial assessment is very different than what we do from a modeling perspective. And the reason for that is that
and Mr. Moffat, I just got a very short amount of time, so I'm just going to cut
Actually,
in.
We're really out of time, but I think this was more or less answered before in that this NRCan's strategy was not as detailed as the modeling. I think that's the answer.
No, that's not the answer. Sorry, Chair. That the reason is that the reason is that measures are interactive, and so you cannot simply add one to another. And what we do is discount the interactive effect and look at only the additional impact, and that's why there's different numbers.
This is highly complicated. It's a highly complex.
I was just going to cut it in to ask for if the Environment and Climate Change Canada could submit a report or any information they have on what Mr. Moffat just said, which was that these disconnects happen frequently. Could we get a list of other disconnects that the government knows about between Environment and Climate Change Canada and Natural Resources and where those gaps are?
I'm sure they'll be happy to oblige. Mr. Dreeshen for 3.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. DeMarco, you were talking earlier about provincial audits and how if they had targets they wanted to address that maybe should be done there. But I go back to your notes, and in paragraphs 5 and 6, I realize this was on the just transition part, but you spoke about less effective provincial carbon pricing systems. You spoke about approving weaker systems for large emitters in some parts of the country, to which some of my colleagues were talking about rural Canada farmers and that sort of thing, so that there was an issue there. So I'd like to expand from that and go back to that which I was talking about earlier. When provinces have major initiatives that they use in order to, for example, Alberta has had, as I was mentioning, has had over 20 years of carbon pricing on heavy emitters, which has allowed it to be able to do the innovative things that it does. Doesn't get much credit for it, but it does all of these innovative things, the push that they have as far as hydrogen is concerned, net zeros in plastics production and so on. All of those things are what is happening now. As a matter of fact, 2 days ago, there was a major announcement of $50 million to launch a hydrogen center of excellence in Olds, in my riding. So these things are happening. And because they happen, if we look at the overall effect as far as our trade is concerned and selling the products that we have, if we don't talk about that, we don't encourage them, we're going to lose that opportunity to sell this technology around the world. And so what I'm asking is, has this concept of those things that are happening in the provinces is that really being addressed? Maybe I'll have to address it to the minister, when he does show up. But I'm just wondering, in the audit, when you say that we know that there are less effective provincial carbon pricing systems, when you say that there's issues with large emitters in some parts of the country, are we really talking about what is the snapshot of what has been happening, and specifically, I say in Western Canada, where the large resources sector is so important, not just to them, but to this country and to the world?
Yeah, so I think you're getting at the tension between strong centralized control and the principle of subsidiarity, for example. So we're in a federal state, so there's always going to be some work being done at the national level and some at the national level in a coordinated way, like the PCF, the Pan-Canadian Framework, and sometimes, the federal government will do its own thing and the provincial government will do its own thing. On a matter of national concern like this, the federal government chose to do a program that allows for provincial systems to be substituted for the federal one, which is called the backstop, if they meet a benchmark. What we're saying is, if you're going to use that system, make sure the benchmark is rigorous enough so that whatever systems are being approved at the provincial level to reflect their own regional needs, for example, that they're at least as effective as the federal backstop. That's the idea.
Sometimes they become ideological, and I say that sincerely, because if someone has said we are getting rid of oil and gas, then this is the way to get rid of oil and gas. And I'm concerned about what we're looking at for agriculture right now. There's been a report saying, the cereal crops, how serious that is, and we have to make changes there. And I'm afraid the next report you're going to have to do is going to be taking a look at agriculture and saying, there must be issues there that need to be addressed. I hope that we do.
Yeah, Mr. Longfield.
Chair, and I'd like to direct my questions towards ESDC to Mr. Brown. The scope of this audit obviously was January 2018 to September 2021, so it isn't looking at the upcoming legislation around just transition or, in fact, the budget that was put forward in 2021 for programming from ESDC. So I'm looking at things like the Sectoral Workforce Solutions Program that has just had a call for proposals. Could you talk about the work that's been happening since the transition? Since earlier we had one of our colleagues saying that there was nothing being done and we weren't doing anything in ESDC.
Sure. Thanks for the question. It's Andrew Brown, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister for Skills and Employment Branch. And really to say, I think, a couple of things. One, that important to recognize the existing programs that are in place in terms of providing support to workers that are affected. And that includes things like the Employment Insurance Program. And there's already been changes that were introduced, some of these during the pandemic, to help increase access to the program. And there's ongoing consultations with worker groups, with industry as well, to better understand some of the changes that could be made to that to help workers in terms of support. And then I think what that's really complemented with is how do we prepare workers for the new jobs in terms of the transition. And so that's where, particularly where you pointed to one of those initiatives, the Sectoral Workforce Solutions Program, is really important. It's something that will help support design and delivery of training and based on sectorial needs. So this is a way that we'll be able to provide tailored supports to help workers to acquire the skills that they need to be successful in the new economy.
Thank you. And when I'm thinking of transition, I'm also thinking of, I've seen previous recessions where workers from Newfoundland picked up jobs in Alberta. Now workers in Alberta might be picking up jobs in Quebec where they're doing some mining work that could be, feeding the supply chain for electric vehicles. Could you maybe talk about the dynamics of working across Canada and how ESDC can help with that?
And thanks for that question as well. I think that I may ask Chris Bates to jump in a little bit to speak to those issues of labor mobility.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. So we do this on a couple of fronts. We do it through the Foreign Credential Recognition Program, which we also received new funding as part of Budget 2022. as well as we do it through the Red Seal program, which really facilitates mobility of apprentices and journey people across Canada. So those are two concrete examples of work that we're doing to facilitate mobility, as well as working collaboratively with provinces and territories to support that.
Thank you, Mr. Bates. And with labor and trying to fill the existing gaps that we've got from COVID, as well as transitioning from one technology to another isn't an easy job. So thank you for what you're doing to help.
Very much. That takes us to the end. It's 1:47 on the dot. Thank you to the witnesses for a stimulating conversation and to the members for their excellent questions. Our next meeting is May 3rd with the Minister on the main estimates, right? Okay, thank you. Meeting adjourned.